All of the day's important events. Events close to home and around the world. Join Moon Gon-yong live from Seoul.
Mobile shopping market.
For the dual use of the Korean name East Sea and the Japanese name Sea of Japan in school textbooks in the state of Virginia.
Now, the poll results expected late tonight won't lead to a structural change in the central government or the National Assembly legislature, but that doesn't mean they won't hold special meaning for the Park administration, which is facing its biggest political crisis since coming into power early last year. Let's take a closer look at the significance of today's elections, the implications, and what we can expect after all of the votes have been counted. Joining us live via Skype is Dr. Robert E. Kelly. He is a professor of political science at Busan National University. Professor Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we have presidential, parliamentary, and local elections here in Korea, so it's probably safe to say that, local elections, people aren't as interested in the local elections as they would be in the first two. But the mood is definitely different this time around. Let's briefly go over why that is the case.
Sure. Well, the big issue has got to be the ferry disaster. Right. Also, I think that's pretty well established. I think also at this point, though, President Park has been in there now for like a year and a half. She's sort of moving into her third year, as your correspondents have said. And this is an opportunity for the voters to sort of intervene and say, here's what we think about the first 2 years of your progress. You see this very often in action in other democracies. We saw this just last week in the European Parliament elections, right, where local elections, other elections get sort of hijacked by big national issues. And they basically become like a referendum. And so this is really a way for Korean voters to say, here's what I think about the first year and a half, 2 years of Park Geun-hye's presidency. Not just say, but just sort of generally, what do they think of her? And that's how it will be read, right? I mean, Korea is like a modern technological society with a big national media and stuff like that. So local issues very easily become nationalized and will be read as a national response.
No, Bob, what about voter turnout? How will that factor into the final results? Let me give you the figure. The figure, according to the National Election Commission, stood at 42.5% as of 2 p.m. today. That's roughly 4 hours ahead of the poll's closure at 6 p.m. And that, of course, includes the 11.49% turnout in early voting, which is one of the highest on record in elections history. So the surveys were conducted then. So what is your view on that? How will the voter turnout factor in?
I tend to accept the conventional wisdom here from other Korean political scientists that the high voter turnout in Korea generally supports the left. The base of the sort of Korean election system really is people over 50 who vote regularly, right? And so the real issue of turnout has always been, we know that elderly voters, gray voters, if you will go to the polls. The real question is, will people under 40 go? And you may remember that 2 years ago, people expected that if the under 40s turned out, then Moon would win the presidency. They did actually turn out, but he still lost, which is one of the reasons I'm actually a little bit skeptical about this. I mean, we'll have to see with the voter turnout. We don't really know yet. But, 2 years ago, everybody said the same thing. 2 years ago said if, the under 40s come out to vote, that Moon is going to win, and he didn't. He still lost by 3 points. So I wonder if Park Geun-hye has got enough, if the conservative bloc, the sort of traditionalist coalition in Korea, is just so large that it would take a tidal wave of youth voters to actually really move the numbers. Because that was what would have been necessary a couple of years ago and didn't happen. But generally still, if the youth vote goes up, which it should because of Sewol, right, then it will definitely rebound negatively on the right.
All right, let's move on to what happens after the elections. Now, what kind of changes do we expect in Korea's entire political landscape after the final results are out?
Well, I think your reporters actually did a pretty good job. I think they captured it pretty well. For the left, this is a really important election. They should do well because of Sewol, and they really need to do well, as you said, particularly because the alliance, the new party alliance, is very new, right? And so they need to crystallize it. It needs to come together. We need to see that Ahn Cheol-soo can actually be a real leader of this bloc. When he ran for president a couple of years ago, to be perfectly honest, he was something of a dilettante. He didn't do particularly well. He was sort of in and he was out, and nobody really knew what he was doing. And he really needs to prove that he can sort of run this party, that it's really serious, that it's not a vanity project for him. And the same thing with the Korean left, just like we were talking about. A couple of years ago, the Korean left should have done better than it did, right? Lee Myung-bak was very unpopular when he left, and the Korean left lost twice in 2012. So this is actually a really important moment for the Korean left. They really need to turn it around, prove that the parties are serious, prove that they can really take on President Park, and prove that they can sort of use this opening created by Park's troubles of the last month actually really move the party forward. If they can't, that's a disaster. So, I mean, this really needs to go well today for the left.
All right, we will be looking forward to those results at the end of today. Robert E. Kelly, professor at Busan National University, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.